Hello everyone. So of course I've come up with another session on mains enrichment. As you have seen yesterday, we have discussed about poverty as well. So I've discussed about all sort of poverty out there, be it relative poverty, be it absolute poverty, all sort of poverty we have discussed, be it nutritional one deficiency out there, all these stuff we have discussed in depth out there. Today we're going to pick up another issue, another theme I would say, because it's a theme based thing. Mains is all about themes out there. We're going to discuss about inclusivity. And again, it's been linked with the poverty as well. It's been linked with the inequality out there in the economy, in the society as well. We're going to discuss all the perspective out there, look at certain statistics for that, and see what we can add in this new theme out there, and how we can enrich our answers with certain useful information out there. Let's begin with this. Let's move on to the first slide of PPT out there. So again, not this. Okay. Before going to any further, I would say let's focus on what's fiscal policy out there. Because in order to understand what's inequality out there, we need to understand what's the fiscal policy out there. In order to understand what's the inequality out there, I need to make you understand what's fiscal policy, how it's been going, what government is doing that. So of course, sir, there has been a fiscal policy. Whenever there has been a fiscal policy, you need to associate that with the government out there. You need to associate fiscal policy with the government out there. What's fiscal policy? Sir, it can be broadly divided into two aspects. It can be broadly divided into two aspects. The first one would be, sir, expansionary. The first one would be expansionary, and second one would be contractionary. So if I talk about fiscal policy, it can be broadly divided into two aspects. The first is expansionary, and the another aspect is contractionary. So again, sir, there has been two aspects of this. One is expansionary, another is contractionary. Expansionary is also termed as fiscal stimulus. And contractionary is also considered as fiscal consolidation. So when I talk about expansionary, how government can expand, increase a money supply out there, or increase the flow of money out there, there can be majorly two broad methods through which government can increase the money supply or cash flow out there in the economy. That two aspects are either to decrease tax, or increase capital expenditure, These are the major two broad ways through which government performs its expansionary fiscal policy, out there. I hope you got these points. Sir, when it comes to contractionary policy, again, there are two broad ways out there through which it can perform its contractionary fiscal policy out there. That is to increase taxation increase taxation purposes out there. That's been doing by the government in recent times out there. If you see, there has been a lot of taxation debate right now. Even the recent debate about the putting of GST on the caramel popcorn out there. It's been too expensive out there. So government has been increasing tax on all of these things. Again, the second purpose would be to decrease capex. Capex means capital expenditure out there. Capital expenditure out there. These are the certain two broad ways through which a government performs its economic functions in the form of fiscal policy. And you can remember these by this beautiful chart out there that has been drawn for you. That is expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy out there. So these are basic two ways through which you can, of course, government does its economic operations out there. Again, sir, when I talk about capital expenditure, what's the capital expenditure out there? If you remember this, if I talk about a capital expenditure, out there, it is the kind of expenditure. It is a kind of expenditure by the government through which it either increases its assets or decreases its liability. It increases its asset or decrease its liability. Now, let me give you an example for this. It will help you to understand this concept much better out there. Let me give you an example for this, sir. So take an example. Say, for example, government is spending some amount of money on railways or certain to build a certain, you can say, national highway. Now, ultimately, government is spending on these stuff. Government is spending on infrastructure out there. What's the infrastructure? Infrastructure is nothing but it's a asset. It's an asset for a government. It's an asset for a government. It's an asset for government. Again, sir, talk about liability. How it can reduce its liabilities. Take an example. For example, if government has taken a loan from, say, IMF or World Bank or other sovereign nations out there, now it has to repay its principal amount out there. What it gonna do? It gonna repay it. It gonna repay its principal amount. For example, government has spent to repay its previous loan. That is to principal amount. Principal amount there. It will lead to lower down its liability side. It will lead to lower down its liability side out there. Lower down its liability side out there. So that's certain examples out there. That's certain example out there. All these stuff will help to increase capital expenditure. So I hope you got the definition of capital expenditure out there. Sir, I said about the principal amount. For example, if government is spending on paying interest amount on that, it will not be accounted in capital expenditure. It will count in revenue expenditure out there. Interest will not be adjusted in capital expenditure out there. Interest payment will be adjusted in. Interest payment will be adjusted in. Interest payment will be adjusted in what? Revenue expenditure. Revenue expenditure out there. Revenue expenditure. What is the revenue expenditure? What is a revenue expenditure? Revenue expenditure is nothing. These are those expenses that doesn't have any impact on assets and liability out there. Revenue expenditure. These expenditure or expenses are those which doesn't have any impact. Which doesn't have any impact on assets and liabilities out there. Doesn't have any impact on assets and liabilities out there. Assets and liabilities out there. So for example, if a government is spending on paying certain salaries to the government employees, this will be considered as revenue expenditure. Paying amount paying salaries to its employees. Will be considered as revenue expenditure out there, will be considered as revenue expenditure out there. So I hope now you get the concept of fiscal policy out there. When I talk about the fiscal stimulus and the fiscal consolidation, you're going to reduce tax. What's the exact meaning of expansionary? See, when you reduce tax and when government increases its capital expenditure, simple motto of government is to boost economy. To boost economy. Because it will lead to increase in money flow out there. People gonna have liquid in their hand. They're gonna spend on certain things. They're gonna demand more things. That will lead to a repercussion. That will lead to, I would say, domino effect out there. Domino effect out there is mean, for example, if government is spending on roadways, now building a roadways require a lot of labor, a lot of material. It will give jobs to a lot of labor out there. It will give jobs to a lot of engineers out there. Again, the economy will come back to the track. It will create a sort of inflation, a necessary inflation that requires to drive economy out there. That's how thing works. That's what expansionary policy is, to inflate certain things. For contractionary, it's been again a counter method out there. When there is too much hyperinflation out there, in order to control the demand out there, in order to control the consumption of a people out there, government, what it does is it reduces down the money supply or money flow out there in the economy. For example, it's gonna increase tax, and it's gonna reduce capital expenditure to squeeze out money out of the economy, in order to control the inflation. And how to control inflation? As you can see, with monetary policy committee, it should remain within the bracket of 2 to 6%. And it's a mandate on monetary policy committee to maintain that sort of price stability out there in the economy. Again, but government has its own role to play out there in order to control the price in the market. I hope you got these points out there. If there is any doubt, you can ask about that. Please look into the chart and just have a look about that. Have a look about that. Have a look into this. I hope you are clear with this concept. Out there. What's expansionary and contractionary? Let me give you a certain glimpse about the fiscal policy once more. I'll make a chart in order to make you understand how it does. How does it operate? Take an example. It's going on boom period. It's that economy is running on a bullish terms and recession. Now, there are two methods through which government deal with these situations. Out there. The first would be procyclical. And countercyclical. For example, if economy is going through a boom period or going through a bullish period out there, it's performing absolutely well, and there has been a great inflation out there. So what's procycle? It's to go with the flow. It's to grow with the flow. In boom, it will increase capex. Out there. Capex, that is capital expenditure, and reduce on taxes. Pro means it's been going with the flow. In terms of counter-cyclical, obviously counter-cyclical is a much practical approach out there. It will help to counter a boom period, too much of bubble creation. It will avoid that. How it will avoid that? It's gonna decrease capex and increase taxes to control hyperinflation. Got it. Up. When you talk about a pro-cyclical in the case of recession means government is or economy is going through a slow growth or negative growth. Economy is going through a negative growth. Economy is going through a negative growth rate. Is going through negative growth rate. Negative growth rate. Going through a negative. Now, in this case, the pro-cyclical approach would be to reduce capex and increase taxes. That is again going with the flow. If practical approach in a recession would be to increase the fiscal stimulus out there, to increase the money supply out there. But in a pro-cyclical approach, we go with the flow. In case of recession, we are not increasing capex, we are increasing taxes. It's a non-practical approach. Pro-cyclical is a non-practical approach out there. What's counter-cyclical approaches? It's to increase capex and decrease taxes. So there would be enough disposable income out there with the public. So there would be enough disposable income out there with the public. So they can spend more, they can demand more, they can bring economy back onto the track. That's how things goes in the economy. In case of boom, our government, especially Indian government, do take this counter-cyclical approach. But in case of recession, it has to take counter-cyclical, but it does not. It takes a pro-cyclical. Approach, which is non-practical. Even when the economy is going through a recession, a lot of times, even in the COVID time as well, the government doesn't decrease taxes. It didn't decrease its taxes. It keep on increasing taxes through GST measures out there. That's how thing works. That's Indian government approach. And sir, as you can see, from here we can move on to the next topic called inequality. Because see, if government gonna adopt this approach during a recession period, it's gonna increase a lot of inequality, because most of the taxes, the burden of taxes was and will be borne by middle class out there, salaried person out there. So it will again create a lot of inequality out there, between the people who are earning, who are the top 1% out there earning almost everything, and between the people that's been doing salaried working, blue collar or white collar jobs out there. So again, it's creating inequality, and the perfect representation of inequality out there can be done through Lorentz curve out there, So if I talk about inequality out there, the perfect representation is, it can be perfectly represented through a Lorentz curve out there, So the topic is inequality. And in inequality, we are going to study Lorentz curve. Give me a moment to draw this. All these stuff out there. This is on y-axis, we will represent the percentage of On y-axis, we will represent the percentage of income. On x-axis, we will represent the percentage of population. Percentage of population. Now, let me give you markings of this. Let me give you marking for this. $20, $40, $60, $80, $100. $20, $40, $60, $80, $100. No, let me explain you this. Let me explain you this. RJ Thakur. Hello, everyone. Hello, sir. Hello. Now let me explain you this. This is called a Lorentz curve. Let me give you this example. This is called a Lorentz curve out there. What's Lorentz curve? Sir, it represents the inequality out there. It represents the inequality out there in a nation. So take an example. What it's showing on y-axis, it represents a percentage of income. On x-axis, it's representing the percentage of population. This straight line is an equality line. It's an equality line out there. And this curved one is a Lorentz curve. What's it showing? So take an example of India. This is approx what? 60% of population. Approx 60% of population is holding only 20% of income. Is holding only 20% of income. See this chart. See this. With 60% of population is only holding 20% of income. Rest 40% is holding 80% of income. That's how inequality is shown or depicted in a Lorentz curve out there. Again, represent this. 60% of population is holding up 20% of income. That's way too less. That's way too less out there. That's complete inequality when you represent India with. Again, rest 40% is getting what? 80% of population. That's why we show that India is unequal out there. It doesn't offer equal opportunities to every person out there. For example, if you're coming from an affluent family out there, coming from families of Adanis, Ambanis, Birlas, Tatas, all these stuff, there's a very high chance you'll get ample amount of opportunities out there. But if you're coming from a middle class out there, then you have to work extraordinarily hard. Again, luck need to support you to perform extraordinary in life. That's how things are, because inequality has been there. You will not get a share of resources out there. You will not get that. When you compare your country, India, with the country of Scandinavian nations like Denmark, Sweden, all these stuffs, they are performing exceptionally well. Every person is getting good education. Everyone is getting good health, medical facilities out there. Everyone is earning decent amount there. There is no much inequality. There is no concept of rich and poor out there. All are equal. Maybe 1920, a difference between only 1920 out there. But when you compare in India, there are people who are living in lavish lives, and there are people who can't even afford two proper meals a day. That's how thing works. And that's been represented by the Lorentz curve. How to calculate a Lorentz curve? See, there is the coefficient called Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient. What's Gini coefficient? Sir, it represents area between ideal line, that is equality line between ideal line and Lorentz curve. Ideal line and Lorentz curve divided by or upon area under the ideal line. Area under the ideal line. So in this case, what's the area between ideal line and Lorentz curve? That's the area. This is the area. This is the area. This is the area between ideal line and Lorentz curve. And what's the area under the ideal line? All this stuff, all that stuff, all that stuff. Let me use different color. This stuff with orange pen. This is the area under the Lorentz curve. Complete area. So, sir, there is two methods. One is called 0 and 1. 0 and 1. 0 represents what? 0 represents perfect equality. 1 represents perfect inequality. India is close to 1, which is showing that it's an unequal society out there. Unequal society out there. It's not been evenly distributed. The resources are not evenly distributed among the section of population out there. 0 represents perfect equality. Say, for example, if this Lorentz curve is drawn over this, area between is 0, area between ideal line and Lorentz will be 0, and Lorentz curve would be 1. It will show 0. So 0 depicts perfect equality, again, which is very ideal, which is very utopian out there. It doesn't happen in real life. But close to 0 would be Scandinavian nations like Denmark, Sweden out there. So 0 represents perfect equality. Perfect equality. And 1 represents perfect inequality. Perfect inequality. That's how this curve works. That's how this curve works. I hope you got this curve. That's called Lorentz curve. That's called Lorentz curve. This depicts complete inequality that's been there in our society. So trust me, it's not only about economic inequality, it's about social inequality as well. When you talk about caste system out there, it depicts a social inequality. When you talk about a food inequality, someone is eating flashy food out there in cafes every day, but one can't even afford, certain people can't even afford 2 proper meals out there in a day. One can get a lot of politicians to send their child to Harvard and Oxford and all these perfect universities, and look at certain amount of rural India people. They can't even afford a schooling out there, proper schooling out there. That's what inequality is. That's what inequality is. Inequality can also be developed in terms of bodily inequality. There would be a lot of people call some fat person, bully them as what you call as a mota hai ye, that, all that stuff. But so that's genetics, that's natural out there. So it's a body shaming is another inequality that's been there in our society since ages. All these stuff indicate that our society is unequal, was unequal, and going to remain unequal. What's going on in the economy? I can trust me on that. A lot of people, 80 crore people, still dependent on the PDS, public distribution system out there. They can't even afford a proper grains out there, good quality grains out there. That's the biggest limitation of a PDS system out there. So all these stuff, why I've explained fiscal policy, the government is doing a lot, but again, the structure of the system is such that not everyone gonna become a successful out there. In spite of doing every sort of hard work, in spite of doing every kind of hard work, he can't succeed. That's how thing is. That's why luck become important, especially in a country like India, when you have 150 crore population out there competing in every possible manner, out there. So I hope you got this concept out there. You hope you got this concept out there. Let's move on to the PPT. Let's move on to the PPT route now. Okay. Again, fiscal policy measures contractionary policy. Government implement contractionary fiscal policy, which involves increased taxes, reduce government spending. What we have studied in our chart. Increase taxes and reduce government spending. What we have studied in our chart. Just look at this. Just look at this. Just look at this. Increase taxes, and reduce government spending. Reduce government spending. Increase taxes and reduce government spending. That you need to understand, okay? That you need to understand. Again, when it comes to outcome, take an example of budget surpluses. These measures aim to create budget surpluses, allowing the government to pay down debt, build reserves for future. For instance, during the late 90s dot-com boom, or the US government achieved significant budget surpluses, reducing national debt. It's all about increasing government spending. It's all about increasing government spending and reducing taxes, and reduce some taxes. And reducing taxes. I hope you got these points. I hope you got these points out there. Okay, let's move on to the next PPT out there. Expansionary policy. We have talked about expansionary policy out there. Simple. It's again a very simple thing out there. Tax cuts, and increase government spending. Tax cuts. It's an expansionary out there. Tax cut and increase government spending. In contractionary, obviously expansionary is tax cuts. In contractionary, we increase taxes to lower down the disposable income with the public out there. I hope you got this. Take this example. These policies typically lead to higher fiscal deficits. When you talk about expansionary policy, so one thing you need to understand, when government will spend more, it will automatically lead to government spending out there. It will automatically lead to a government spending out there. It will automatically will lead to a government spending out there. And when the higher spending will be higher, it will lead to a higher fiscal deficit. What's fiscal deficit? So fiscal deficit is nothing. But its total expenditure is more than total receipts. That means your expenses are higher than your receipts. That's what it actually means. Higher fiscal deficit indicates that government will borrow more. Higher fiscal deficit indicates that government will borrow more, and more borrowing is not sustainable. Increased borrowing is not sustainable in the long run. How? Take an example of US out. US has been facing extreme debt crisis. Sir, I think it's been 36 trillion that it has to repay in this July. It's been maturing out there. $36 trillion. It has to pay in July. It's been under tremendous pressure to repay its interest, to repay its principal amount. That's why it's going through a slowdown. And Trump administration has been amplifying that recession by imposing a lot of tariff and reciprocal tariff policies out there in the global economy. I hope you got these points. How higher fiscal deficits erode even public confidence in a government. See, for example, if my government is under a lot of debt out there, you can easily arm twist. For example, India has taken a lot of loan from US. US can arm twist them. US can say, do this, do that in your foreign policy, and you have to do it because you have taken loan from that. You have taken loan from them. You have to repay interest and principal amount to them. It is nothing but an arm twisting out there in international relations. Now, so if India will become a puppet to US out there, it's very natural that I lose my interest and my faith in my own government out there. It will erode public trust on our government. Too much of fiscal deficit. Some amount of fiscal deficit is applicable. It is necessary. It happens with every nation out there. But too much of fiscal deficit erodes public confidence, erodes public confidence, or public trust would be a better word. Erodes public trust on government, and that's is not suitable, because as per social contract theory, you give certain amount of powers to the government because you trust them. You see, look at normal people out there. They can't run economy out there. They have to run their houses. They have to earn. They have to go to the job every day out there. Calculate what 9 to 5 job they are doing. So I mean, they can't run their nation. So in order to carry out their life peacefully, they delegate certain amount of powers to the government on basis of trust as well. On basis of trust, of course, that's what happens. But if you erode that trust, it's not gonna sustain in the country. It will eventually lead to what? No confidence motion out there. So again, it will create a turmoil in the economy and in the obviously legislative part of the world as well. So what it is to equally maintain fiscal deficit. It's important to maintain fiscal deficit out there in order to maintain the sanity of government, So capital expenditure is important. It will lead to a development out there. It's important because it increases assets of a government. It leads to a domino effect. Domino effect is nothing but it will lead to a replica of growth out there outside the economy as well. But at the same time, it needs to be calculated very precisely out there. You can't take risk and say let's spend without giving a thought on this. That's not gonna help the economy in the long run out there. That's what exactly happens with the US right now, and it's facing a debt crisis at this moment. So I hope you got these points. Let's move on to the next thing. So we have just talked about fiscal deficit out there. Look at this. When we talk about the fiscal deficits, it's nothing total expenditure minus revenue receipts and total receipts. For example, government expenditure is nothing but revenue expenditure plus capital expenditure minus expenditure minus receipts. Total receipts is capital receipts plus revenue receipts, but excluding borrowings. So don't include borrowings out there. Otherwise, the net result will be zero. Excluding borrowings. So as you can see that US has been facing the acute debt crisis. 36 trillion amount it has to repay in this July. It's been going through a lot of scrutiny out there. It's been facing a lot of scrutiny out there from the whole international market out there. As you can see, even the Trump has been carrying out what called reciprocal tariff policy. It's creating a debt crisis. $36 trillion has to be repaid in this July by the US. It has to be repaid in this July by the US government out there. So of course, that's not a great situation for the US out there. That's not a great situation for the US right now. So if India doesn't want to fall into that trap, it needs to spend its capital expenditure, needs to plan its capital expenditure very precisely, keeping all the variables in mind. But you need to think about that. Hire a lot of economists out there, go through with academia, discuss that with what you call the people of Delhi School of Economics and Indian Statistical Institute. That's how you plan things. Otherwise, it will become what we call all messed up out there. No, and trust me, we don't have too much of caliber out there in the bureaucracy at this moment, because they are journalists out there. They can't handle the specialized stuff out there. No one is Raghuram Rajan out there who has done an MBA from an IIM Ahmedabad out there. So what we need is a specialized people who can look at the economy, see that okay, the world is going through a slowdown. There has been a tariff that's been going on. Globalization has been transformed into a deglobalization. At this point, what we need to do is to maintain ourselves, is to become an Atmanirbhar, is to focus on a manufacturing sector out there, because it's an employment elastic out there at the moment. Because we need jobs. We are heading towards a jobless growth out there. We need jobs. All these stuff we need to balance appropriately. to balance appropriately. Otherwise, what will happen? It will go down or slow down. And India is a nation of a 150 crore people. And India is a nation of a 150 crore people. India is a nation of 150 crore people, sir. You need to offer them jobs. How will they live? It's a developing nation still. It's still a developing nation. It's not a developed nation. They need regular income out there. They need regular income. Fiscal expansion is a great tool. To provide a stimulus to the dead economy out there, but it needs to be used appropriately. It needs to be used appropriately in order to reduce down inequality in a very systematic manner out there. As you have studied the Lorentz curve out there, you can see how it operates, how there has been a lot of inequality, but what we need is to come down. Government is doing that. It's doing a bit of it because it's been doing in what we call a medical system. Arogya Yojana has been there. A lot of scholarship has been there for the meritorious students out there. But again, it's very limited. The scale is very limited. We need a large scale interference of government in terms of socialistic measures to improve the condition of India, I hope you got this discussion. And love this part. We're going to come up with another discussion as well, because we're going to discuss economy from a very absolutely UPSC perspective. I want to give you a perspective that you can use in your mains and writing, you can use in your essay, you can use even in your optional out there. I'm not going to teach you with all these PPT stuff out there. That's not even education out there. If I read only from PPT, that's not completely education. I love to explain things. I love to debate about that, because that's only help you in critical answer writing. What you need is points. What you need is thought process. You need certain statistics. You need the meaning of that. That's how you use simple things in a very advanced manner out there. I hope you love this session. Thanks for this. Thank you.